Hello, beloveds, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, a podcast for those who are survivors of childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and narcissistic abuse. This podcast is hosted by Rachel Leroy, a college professor and trauma survivor. Many of us spend years trying to heal and don't get anywhere. We don't always target the trauma itself, which is so often what keeps us stuck. This podcast is where faith meets science. Rachel is an emotional healing expert with 20 years of experience applying healing modalities that helped her start making progress after nothing else worked. She'll show you how to do the same. Each week, we'll cover a topic that will show you how to heal trauma for good. Please check out our website and show notes at christianemotionalrecovery.com and join the Facebook community, Trauma Survivors Unite, Christian Emotional Recovery.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery Podcast, episode number 4. This week, we are going to discuss unhealthy coping mechanisms, why we have them, and how to overcome them, and a breakthrough that I've had to help provide some insight into healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms, particularly as they relate to trauma. I had a bit of an experience and a bit of a breakthrough today, just sort of spontaneously, and sometimes those are the best experiences ever. And I wanted to share my experience with you and just kind of a little bit about how you might apply this strategy to your own life. I know that this experience is particular to my wiring, to my conditioning, to my experience, but I felt like this might help somebody. And so if it can help anybody or give anybody any insight, then I'm more than glad to share it to help you and to give you a concrete strategy to help you with something, because this is an area where I've struggled my entire adult life. I'll be honest, growing up somewhere along the way, became conditioned to look at the negative, the downside of things. And I think a lot of us that grew up in homes that were less than ideal, maybe abusive, if we had continuous neglect, or if someone emotionally abused us over a long-term period of time, or someone did something to us that was very traumatic one time or over a series of times, our mind is conditioned to believe on some level that what happened to us was our fault. And as children, we're helpless. We don't have coping strategies, and sometimes there may be another adult or an older kid there that can tell you, you know what happened to you was wrong. You know that you're valuable and that I love you. And if we had those kind of anchoring forces in our lives, that is something. But if the messages we heard on a daily basis were either implicit or explicit, you're not valuable enough for my attention, I don't see you, you are just a means to an end for me, I see you as a burden, I don't want you around, you're worthless, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're ugly, whatever the case may be. Or if we were treated in a way, even if the words that were told to us weren't damaging, maybe it's what we weren't told, that I love you, I see you, I hear you, your feelings are valid, you're valuable, you're loved, you matter, you are the most important thing to me, I treasure you, I will protect you, and all of those things. Just the absence of those things, even if nobody ever says hurtful and mean things to us, can also be just as damaging. And somewhere along the way, I think that when people are in adverse environments over a long-term period of time, and there are infinite combinations of possibilities and circumstances that can create that, there's a mindset of, instead of the way this person treated me was wrong. As a child, you don't understand how to differentiate between how somebody treated you and between it being you. So when you're a child, you don't know any different. And you tend to internalize that, and instead of saying how I was treated was wrong, it's I am wrong. And you build up shame for things you didn't even do. You build guilt for for things that you didn't even do wrong. You build this sense of negativity towards yourself that is based on lies that Satan implanted in your head through people that either didn't know how to make you to build you up and to love you, or people that didn't care to. Or in some cases, they may have even wanted to damage you if they were of the more sadistic variety. And unfortunately, I do believe the majority of people are not like that, but there are some people who are. Either way, in those circumstances, I believe our mindset, something bad happens that's like, it's like throwing stones into a pond. You keep throwing stones, the pond gradually fills up. One day, when you throw a stone in, you're going to see the stone hit the surface of the lake and it's not going to go under. In other words, you're going to see the results of all of that buildup, of all of those negative thoughts that have built up in your mind. They're all going to come to the surface. The different ways that we deal with that kind of situation. It's not necessarily trauma. It could just be emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and just the impacts of different things that happen to us that are not healthy, where we have to find a way of coping with that. Some people flight, which is to flee. Some people fight, which is aggression and argument and maybe even violence. Some people freeze, which means they just completely go blank and don't do anything. And some people fawn, which means they may be codependent and they actually, I guess, sort of try to ingratiate themselves to someone. Look at what a wonderful person I am. And they try to do things for that person and for other people. They try to nurture people and build them up in order to get the love that they need. And so none of those are healthy coping mechanisms. That's the 4 F's. Fawn, flight, fright, fawn, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so, like I said, we'll talk about those in another podcast, but I wanted to go over those briefly so you know some of those coping strategies. Well, my coping strategy became to turn on myself and to be negative, because I saw some people around me who were going through a similar experience to me, and their response was to fight. There was constant bickering, arguing, conflict, and not being able to get along with other people. And I saw the problems that caused in life for these people. And I didn't want to be like that. I felt like that was the last thing in the entire world I wanted to be. I did not want to be disagreeable. I didn't want people to hate me. I didn't want people to not like me. I wanted to be accepted and loved. And so for me, and it's partly probably my nature, I tended to be agreeable. I tended to fawn and I tended to freeze. But what happened with a lot of that anger and that aggressive energy is that I turned it on myself in self-hatred. And I think about it now, and I think about that little inner child inside of me, and I just look at her now and I'm like, I'm so sorry that I did that to you, even though it wasn't my fault. And one thing, though, that I did to cope was that I don't know, there was a specific incident, and I was thinking negatively a lot at the time, and that was my coping strategy at the time. I had another coping strategy where I misbehaved for a while and I would act out. That was a temporary situation, and then I overcame that. I had another coping strategy where I hoarded and I didn't clean things up and I was really lazy. I also overcame that strategy. But for some reason, I went through a phase where I was very negative about everything. And what I see now is that if you have an addiction, whether it's negativity or television or drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or sex or whatever the sin is that you're addicted to, in order to cope with that emotional stuff that's inside of you, you don't know where to put it, that emptiness that never goes away. And none of it fills it up. For me, it was negativity. And I used negativity to try to, it only briefly gave me relief from the emotional pain. And, I knew Christ during part of this time, but I did not have the wherewithal and I didn't have the understanding of His grace that allowed that part of me to become filled up like His love does now. And I was, growing from glory to glory in that grace as I got older. And as I've gotten older, I've begun to find that Christ is more than sufficient and He does fill me up. But negativity is an addiction. It's a lifetime habit. And for me, this is a good example where maybe you can apply this if it's not negativity for you. Maybe you are negative about certain things. I want you to know one thing though. If you struggle with an addiction, if you struggle with a weakness and you know it's connected to these issues, to these experiences you had in your childhood, then I want you to know that it is not your fault that you struggle with this. It is not your fault. However, you are in a place where you need to know that God loves you first, and He will take you just as you are, and you have no reason to feel shame when you come to God. Just come to Him as you are, and know that He loves you first, and know that He wants you to heal first. And then from that, know that He will heal you, He will change you, He will forgive you, and He will help you with your sins. And so, but you can't just say, I'm sorry, and change your mind, and then suddenly the habit just goes away. That may happen for some people, but I've heard too much of this positive thinking stuff. And like I said, I want to do another post on positivity and why I think that even though positivity itself is wonderful, that if you use that to try to steamroll over negativity, if the negativity is rooted in emotional hurt and it's rooted in abuse and it's rooted possibly even in trauma, that you can try to be positive all day long, and all it's going to do is re-traumatize you, and all it's going to do is make you feel worse when you tell yourself, be positive. I'm going to choose to cancel out this negative thought with a positive thought. It might help some, and that strategy is great for somebody who is just trying to do some general cleaning up of their thinking. I'm not saying don't work on being positive, but I'm saying that can actually, well, let me give you an example with me. So for the last 25 years or so, ever since I've been a little girl, I've struggled with being negative about everything. And people would say, you're such a negative person. All you do is complain and groan and grumble and all of that. And I took that personally. I felt like that's who I was because that's what people told me. They didn't say you have a negative attitude, or even if you say somebody has a negative attitude, that's saying that you choose to be that way. And I knew that I wasn't choosing to be that way, but when I looked at other people that I didn't want to be like, and I saw them play the victim role to a T in a very conscious way, I thought, if I say that being negative is not my fault, I'm going to be playing the victim and making an excuse to not clean up my thoughts, to not improve myself. So I tried to clean up my thoughts and I tried to improve myself. I took responsibility, and I could never overcome my negative thinking. I did everything over the course of 20 plus years. I read Norman Vincent Peale books, The Power of Positive Thinking. I read Tony Robbins books. I did seminars. I did classes. I did meditations. I did affirmations. I would do reflections and journals, and I would do this every single day. I would observe my thoughts as the witness. You may have heard of that, observing your thoughts as the witness. We'll talk about that as a strategy for coping later on too. But nothing worked. And I thought that I didn't have discipline. I thought that there was something wrong with me. I thought I was lazy. I thought I was deficient. And I thought that I was just so screwed up because I could not change my positive thinking. No amount of reconditioning and work made a difference. It did not matter. It did not make a difference. And I could never figure out why. And as I've stated in another post, I don't know if I stated this in another podcast or not, but basically what happened to me was one day God revealed to me, I don't know why now of all times, then of all times He did, but He revealed to me that I had been abused. And I literally did not know I was abused because the people that abused me told me that I wasn't. And since they were the people that I saw as the authority in my lives, I believed them. And so when I had that smoking gun, it was like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely life-changing. And I realized that it did explain all the things that were going on with me, and that there was nothing wrong with me intrinsically, and that it's not a wonder. I was the way I was, because I started unraveling all this stuff and I started pulling this rope, and there were just more and more and more knots in it. And even though I've done self-examination 100,000 times, I never saw that I was abused. I thought, well, yeah, I have a dysfunctional childhood. Yeah, my family's not perfect. But I never understood that specific people abused me, and that it was a long-term thing. And that sometimes simply by omission of certain things, that it could impact children, especially sensitive children. And so the reason I share this with you is because I want you to know that that's part of the journey that started helping me to see that I could change negativity, but that I couldn't do it through the Norman Vincent Peale, oh, be positive, oh, when you think of a negative thought, cancel it out with a positive thought. That works for some people, and I'm not saying don't try that strategy. You should try that strategy. I'm just saying that it didn't work for me, and that if you have some of those deeper knots inside of your psyche, it may not work for you to untie them. You may spend the rest of your life trying to untie them, and they will not come untied. And God can heal you, but God also gives us tools, I believe, that give us specific ways out of our hurt and into our healing. And I don't know why sometimes it takes people until they're 30 or 50 or 70 years old to find those tools. But the thing is I was relentless. I would not give up. I never stopped. I said I will keep looking for the right healing tools until the day I die. I will try things that maybe some people say are unorthodox. And I'm not telling you to do that. And I'm not telling you not to do that. You have to look at the Bible and pray about it and let that be between you and God. And, study what other people say, but don't defer to their interpretations. You need to understand the word for yourself. And I know that that's not something a lot of people will tell you, especially if they want you to think the way they think. But I'm of the conviction that people need to discern based on scriptures. They need to be educated. They need to listen to good, solid teachings, but then they also need to use their own discernment about what they do and don't do when it comes to some of those gray areas, like meditation, like EFT. So basically, my negativity became a habit. It ruled my life. And anytime, let's just say, for example, somebody cut me off in traffic, I would get so annoyed and so mad, and I would say, you blah, 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 and I would just rant and rave because I was so angry. Or let's say that I had 3 people sign up for my tutoring without consulting me first, and I would get really irritated because I have a sign that says, please contact me before signing up for a session. And I felt like they were being disrespectful of me, or they were being ignorant in the sense that they didn't read my description very well. So those are just random examples. It could be anything, right? Any irritation, annoyance, something that makes you angry. I'm not talking about traumatic stuff, but right now I'm talking about those pesky things that we deal with during the day. Being stuck in traffic, somebody cutting you off, having too many things scheduled in your day. Some of those things we can control. And if we can, then we need to look at ourselves and say, well, you scheduled this, and learn from it and don't do it again. But I think for other things, it may be things that are outside of our control. And so But what basically, I've been struggling with this my entire adult life, and I've found gradual healing has helped to alleviate that some. The need to complain has kind of subsided a little bit because I've actually done a lot of healing work. God has done a lot of changing in my life, and I'm seeing that change radically accelerate in the last year or year and a half. And today I was just thinking about something that I had to do. And I was thinking about something else that I just finished. Basically, I have a student who signed up for a tutoring session at 4 o'clock, and I was grading a set of discussions. I've got 4 sets of assignments to grade this week, aside from the other teaching that I do and working on my business and podcast. And so I was just getting stressed out. Everybody gets stressed out. They complain to themselves. Come on, let's be honest. We all do it. It's a human thing that we all do. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Usually I use these templates where I can copy and paste comments into the rubric. And that allows me to give feedback a lot quicker. And then I'll put some of my own comments in to customize them because I work really hard for my students. But I didn't feel like it was fair to me that I had to spend 3 hours in a discussion because the platform for this particular discussion was different than the one I do for my other discussions. So basically, it was very clunky, very slow. The platform is not very functional for grading, and I didn't have any templates because this is the first time I've taught this online class in 2 years. So I'm doing everything from scratch. I'm using this clunky interface, and everything is taking a lot more time, and I'm still trying to give the thorough individualized comments that I always give my students because I try to follow my ethical standards. So basically I was complaining to myself, and I was like, God, it shouldn't have taken 3 hours to do that. This is wasting my time. I want to work on my podcast. I want to work on my business. When am I going to make any money? That kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's taking away from me. And it just kept, when I have those kinds of thoughts, and if you have this, you probably know what I'm talking about, where you just ruminate. You don't want to think that, but you just ruminate over and over and over and over, and it just won't stop. And you can tell it to stop. You can try to be positive, and it just keeps on. And this whole thing about like not ever being able to stop the negativity, to be able to counteract it, to be able to just kind of flow and open up with it and accept it. That's another strategy. It does make it better when you don't resist it, but it doesn't make it go away. I should say it doesn't make it worse. It prevents it from making it worse. But like if you react to it and you feel guilty and you're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. And you chide yourself and you beat on yourself. I've felt so much guilt being negative, and it's just made it worse responding that way. So learning to stop and observe my thoughts has made such a difference. And I've been training myself consciously time after time after time after time in my meditations, in my journals, watching videos, repetition of reading PDF files, and learning how the mind works, learning how to respond to that, learning to stop, to slow down, to think actively, to think consciously, and to observe my thoughts. And it's like I've done that for so long now that I've internalized it. And I walked into the kitchen and I was just thinking to myself, it just came up again. I'm like, 3 hours, because that's what negative addiction does. You just ruminate on something. And like I said, you do everything you can to make it go away, and it won't go away. You just can't make it go away. Try not to think of a white polar bear right now. You thought of a white polar bear, right? So basically, something inside of me just said stop. Not stop, but stop. And I stopped. And I just stopped. And I was going to say it to myself again. And I said, don't say it. Don't say it. Stop. And I stopped. I thought the thought, but I didn't think it. You know what I mean? I didn't affirm it with that negative energy. I said, I just spent 3 hours on a discussion. That's not fair. That's wasting my time. And I was like, I looked at myself and I was like, I hear you. And then I just started saying it over and over and over again. I hear you. 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 And I said it not in a repetitious way that was like saying something out of ritual. It was coming from my spirit. It was coming from a place where I was acknowledging my own need to be seen. And as soon as I did that, that ruminating urge went away like that. I'm not saying that would happen every time, but in that case, it just vanished. And I was like, whoa, what did I just do? What just happened here? You know how you find some of the best things by accident? Well, I have these insights, but finding your own path to apply them can be a whole other thing. And I stopped and I analyzed what happened. And first I told myself, I said, you don't have to do something just because society says you have to do it. Because being negative to me is one of the things, if you're positive, everybody loves you and everybody follows you and you're popular. And if you're negative, nobody wants to be around you. Nobody cares about you and everybody just labels you as a negative person. And they don't bother to dig beneath the surface to find out why you're going through what you're going through and that maybe there's pain behind that. The same with addiction and other kinds of behaviors that make people less than, the kind of qualities that people don't necessarily want to be around. And that's another thing I've experienced is the hurt of feeling rejected and projecting my own feeling of rejection onto other people, even if they didn't reject me, being afraid that they would hate me and they would reject me and they would stigmatize me and label me if they knew that I was a negative thinker. And so I tried to put all that stuff inside. And so the reason I said to myself, you don't have to be anything that society thinks you need to be. Mind you here, I'm not talking about rebellion against God. I'm talking about just separating shoulds from ises. Does that make sense? Separating the situation I was in from the expectations that I've internalized that actually keep me stuck in this loop of negativity. So I said, you don't have to be anything that society thinks you should be. I also said you don't have to respond to situations the way other people think you should. And I said each of those things to myself with very strong emphasis about 5 to 10 times each. I just followed this instinct like I was pulling that rope of knots out, and I was untying each knot one at a time, and they were actually coming unknotted. And so I said that to myself several times because I wanted to really emphasize to myself this process. And basically what came up for me was that I got the insight that my negativity was the little child in me that was invalidated. Her boundaries were stepped on. And one thing that I've learned is that when you get angry, when you complain, when you get irritated, it's your body's way and your mind's way of telling you that a boundary's been crossed, either by circumstances, by other people, or by yourself, by whoever. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they did was wrong or that the situation's wrong, but a boundary's been crossed. And if you get angry, probably there is something wrong going on. But basically what I'm saying is that a boundary had been crossed for me so many times when I was a child that I had no boundaries. Nobody taught me autonomy in the sense that it's okay to say no, and that it's not okay for somebody to cut you down and to say mean things to you. And it's not okay for people to tell you that you're stupid and that you're worthless. It's not okay for people to just ignore you because they feel like you're in the way. And so all of that stuff built up inside of me, and there was a child there that never felt seen. She never felt seen. And so she's constantly down in that little dark pit inside of my mind, and she looks up at me and she raises her hand and she's like, ooh, 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 me. She's trying to get my attention. And so for me, and it may be this way for you, an addiction or a complaint or something like that, to me, it's that hurt person inside of you. You can call it your inner child if you want. It's that hurt person inside of you, that part of you that was overlooked, that was forgotten about, that was disregarded, that was invalidated, that was abused, that boundaries were crossed, that you were ignored. And maybe you experienced this through school because of what happened in your home. And maybe you experienced it in adulthood and ended up in a bad marriage. And you got treated that way by people at work and the person you were married to. And, I'm lucky that I have somebody who's fairly supportive. Things aren't perfect. But the whole point is that child inside of me was asking for validation. She wanted to be seen. And so to me, the negativity was just my mind's way because a boundary had been crossed, kind of like when I was a child. It was the same kind of experience, whether it was being overlooked or having a boundary stepped on, and whether or not my response to a situation was healthy or not wasn't the point. The point is that if you process what you go through and you validate yourself, you're giving yourself an avenue to deal with that emotion in a healthy way. So saying, I don't have to respond to this the way society thinks I should, I don't have to respond to this the way other people think I should, isn't just giving you free rein to just complain and complete anarchy in your behavior, but it's a way of allowing you to separate expectation and fear from your actual observation of the situation so that you can have enough freedom to explore what's going on without fear. And for me, when I told that little girl that complaint was coming from, when I told her that I heard her, that I saw her, and I did it over and over, and I did it with real feeling. Like I really meant it from my gut, from my core of my soul. So what came up for me is that when you complain about something, or if you have an addiction and maybe you start to act on your addiction, or you even act on it, maybe you overeat as an addiction, and then maybe you have half a bag of potato chips and 2 slices of chocolate cake when you were just going to have a plate of carrots as a late night snack. And then you just beat on yourself and you're just like, oh, I'm so stupid. And you complain about it. When that happens, or if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're just like, maybe you curse or something and say things you shouldn't and cuss at the person, or whatever the case may be. And then you feel terrible because you just did something you're not proud of. Instead of beating on yourself, ask God to forgive you, and then just figure out inside of yourself with that reaction. Just don't judge it, and just say, I see you. Whatever complaint comes up, say, I see you. I hear you. I feel you. I acknowledge you. And do it several times, and do it with full feeling. Stop and analyze the emotion. We're taught that we're not supposed to overthink and not supposed to overanalyze. And there are things we can overthink. But I think that observing our emotions, stopping, acknowledging that child inside of us that's trying to be seen and heard because she never was, or he never was. We need to give that child the love that he or she never had. We need to remind her, I see you and I hear you. God sees you and God hears you. And no matter how small the thing that's inside of you is that's going on, no matter how small that little child is inside of you, you are significant and you matter. And I see you and I hear you and I recognize you and you have value and you matter. When you say those things in response to that complaint, to that response, whatever the case may be, you are stopping the source of whatever the behavior is in its tracks. You're not targeting the symptoms. When you just say, oh, stop and swap a positive thought for a negative one, if it's just an individual thing and the person doesn't have a lot of emotional baggage, great. That probably solves the problem. But for most people, or for a lot of people who have these deeper issues, you have to get to the root of the problem, or you are going to continue to struggle with the same thing. If you try something and you do everything that all the instructions in some kind of self-help thing says, and you are still struggling, and you're being disciplined, and you're working your butt off, and you're consistent, and you're still barely seeing results, or you're not seeing results at all, it's not because you're insufficient. It's not because you're not doing it right. It's not because you are intrinsically deficient. It's not because you're stupid. It's not because you're incapable. It's not because you're slow at these kinds of things. It's because there's some kind of hurt, trauma, or your inner child, which is basically the part of you that never got a chance to grow up, because people that are mature and grown up and healthy, they have a strong sense of their autonomy. They understand that they are allowed to have boundaries and to say no. They respect themselves and other people. They don't take everything personally, or too many things personally, if somebody says or does something that might offend them. I'm not saying there's nothing to get offended by, but I'm saying that they're not oversensitized to those things. So if you're easily offended, or you complain a lot, or you tend to be prone to addiction, I guarantee you that there is a child. I'm not saying you're a child. I'm not saying you're immature. To be able to deal with what you deal with every day takes a warrior. You are a freaking warrior. So remember that. And if you are facing this stuff and dealing with it, you are really a freaking warrior. So you just need to remember that, just symbolically, there's an inner child inside of you that wants to be heard, that wants to be seen, that wants to be acknowledged, that wants to be loved. And she never was. And so she's trying to get what she needs now. And if you can give her what she needs by reminding her of how much God loves her, and by telling her that you see her and that you hear her and that you acknowledge her, and you do that when those things come up, go beneath whatever that response is, that offense, that negativity, that complaint, that addiction, that need to just grab onto something that's like a bottomless pit. Go beneath the feeling and figure out what that little thing inside of you is trying to tell you, and then give it what it needs. If it needs to be seen, then see it. Ask yourself, what in this situation needs the most attention now? What in this situation needs my healing and my attention now? And go to that place, pray about it, read scripture over it, affirm peace over this part of your life. Maybe listen to the trauma prayer. Look it up on YouTube if you haven't. It's just type in trauma prayer. And you can listen to that, and that'll help too. But just remember to just say, I see you, I hear you, I know you're there. And do it in a way that you give it your full attention, and you give it full, open, unjudgmental, no strings attached compassion. And most people will be like, well, I don't know if I can do that. But if you remember that God's love is bottomless, and it says width, the depth, the height, the breadth, and there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. If you've ever had an experience of God's perfect, infinite, knock you upside down like a wave when you're surfing kind of love that God has for us, allow that love to soak into you. Make it an experiential thing. Practice something physically if you have to know that love is there intellectually, and to feel it emotionally. And you will know the Spirit of God is healing that one little thing in you. And if you do that 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times over the course of a year, you are going to start to see yourself become a different person. And all the things that you struggled with your whole life, when you get to the root of what caused the symptom to begin with, to me, complaints, negativity, offense, overreacting to things, being jumpy, being afraid, addictions, things like that are symptoms of something deeper. And I'm not saying you don't address the symptoms, but I'm saying you get to the root of the problem, and that will help you to heal. And so I just wanted to share that experience with you, because I felt like it's a little more personal, and it's hard for me to share stuff that's personal, but I don't even know if this will make sense to anybody, but if it can help anybody, I just wanted to put it out there, because I'm telling you, I spent 20 years doing everything, and nothing worked for me until I started getting to the root of it, until God gave me that revelation, which completely changed my life. And I'm so thankful for it. I'm so thankful for it every day. God is so good. And if you are relentless in your healing, it is not for the faint of heart, but if you are relentless in your healing, God will heal you. Okay? God will heal you. So I just wanted to put that message out there. And this is podcast number 4. If you haven't done so already, please click subscribe on my podcast. Please click subscribe on my YouTube channel. And if you're in either one of those, look at the bottom, and there are links to my podcast and to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and get updates for when a new podcast drops or when a new video drops. Also, I'm a writing instructor and I'm a book coach, and so check out my website, which is more about the writing side, rachelleroy.com, and I'll just put all the links below, and if you're interested, please click, and I'll provide some other resources, and you can see those as well. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and I hope you've gotten something out of this message, and thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Emotional Recovery, hosted by Rachel Leroy. For links to this week's resources and to join the discussion, check out this episode's show notes at christianemotionalrecovery.com, where you can also find links to our YouTube channel and Facebook group. Join our email list and get other episodes and resources. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review the podcast and tell a friend who may benefit from this message. See you next time. And remember, beloveds, God loves you, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made.